Okay, it's ladies and gentlemen, it's time to continue the program, and it seems to be so that I have lost one of my colleagues, Torstein Gunnarsson, somewhere in Iceland, but it's no problem. We will start the keynote session, and I will moderate it. So this is the last of the 4 keynote sessions during these 2 days, and the idea is, as you have seen, to change the rhythm every now and then and to have a balance between keynote sessions and parallel sessions. So we have one keynote speaker, Professor Matthias Finger from Swiss Federal Technological Institute University, Swiss Federal University of Technology, and he is an expert on energy and political sciences, and has done research on the Arctic as well. And then we have a presentation by one young researcher, Hanna Lempinen, she's PhD candidate at the University of Lapland, Finland, and her expertise is as well very much dealing with energy in the case study of the Barents Sea region. But we will start by the presentation by Matthias Finger. So Matthias, please. And you will have about 20 to 23 minutes. And then we will have Hanna's presentation, and then we will have again.
And now where did discussion. It disappear?
So, Matthias, please.
Where did it disappear? Now I can't find my presentation anymore. It was here a few minutes ago, but
it's not here anymore?
No.
Do you have the USB?
Yeah. No, just put it here.
Yep.
The first one. Okay. Good. Okay. Thanks. Sorry, it somehow disappeared. Thanks for the invitation to give a keynote. I will stick to the time. And I want to start right with something like this. Energy return on energy invested per energy source. You see that over time the scale is about, to the right you get about 10 times as much energy out of the energy you invest in getting it, and there you will find current, oil and gas fields, nuclear, photovoltaic, solar, and then all the way down there is not much energy return on energy invested anymore. On biofuels, for example, the 1930 oil and gas fields had much more return. Okay, as a first, just setting the context. And this does not include risk premiums and problems that arise. On the other axis, you have the profits you can make. Okay, so there is a relationship between the energy you need to extract energy and the profits you can make from it. I tried to put the Arctic somewhere here. The fact that we are now getting interested in Arctic oil and gas after solar energy probably tells something about the energy return on energy invested. The other arrow I have tried to put up there is that if the climate is changing, as we know the climate is changing, maybe it is a little bit easier to get Arctic oil and gas, but still we are very much on the right side. Okay, this is the second slide just as an introduction. I call it the age. We are in the age of diminishing returns. Oil has peaked, depending to whom you talk, but oil has peaked. You can see it. Actually, it doesn't really matter whether it has peaked. You can see that the energy you need to get more energy out is declining, is increasing. And the only thing that this slide shows on the left side, you can see that before you needed less energy, the volume of energy you have available, you can use it for getting energy back. The red arrow for essentials like food and welfare and things like that. And then the rest, what they call discretionary consumption and investment. This is the big blue arrow, is what you have available as energy for development. Okay. Now, as we need more energy to extract energy, you will have less energy available for development. Basically, that's what it says. This is the energy you might might need for innovation, for adaptation, for doing all kind of things. So it will be tougher and tougher to get the energy out that we need to basically cope. And this does not, does not include climate disruption, catastrophes, and things like that, which will consume another amount of energy just to simply deal with the negative consequences of what we are doing. Okay. By the way, I can recommend that document. You find it on the internet, Perfect Storm, by an American consultant. It's really very, very clear. So this sets the background of my speech. Why am I interested in the Arctic? I think the Arctic is a pointer, is a way to look at the age of diminishing returns. The Arctic already today points at the main features of this age of diminishing returns. And I think there are sort of four big areas which I think are interesting to look at, and where the Arctic is a very good analyzer of what is to come. One is this whole tension between industrial development, further resources exploitation, and ecological sustainability. CO2 reduction, things like that. In the Arctic, I think it illustrates very well that this tension to pursue and get more energy out, to pursue industrial development, whereas at the same time we should reduce consumption, diminish CO2 emissions, and I think the Arctic is a perfect illustration of that tension. The tipping points. I think the Arctic illustrates, and I'll come back to that, the rise, the emergence of tipping points, ecological tipping points, climate disruptions, as we already have heard yesterday, and social disruptions. We had a very good presentation yesterday on the villages in Alaska that have social disruptions as and I think the Arctic again illustrates tipping points, which will happen somewhere else in the world as well. Then we had a very good presentation yesterday that on sort of what I call the end of nature, but it's not. That's Bill McKibben's words. The fact that what we observe now already in the Arctic is man-made. It's the result of anthropogenic changes, or what is now called in geology the Anthropocene, the new era where the humans shape the planet. And I think the Arctic, again, is a good illustration of that Anthropocene already at play. And the fourth big area is the changing dynamics of actors and actor relations. I think the Arctic illustrates very well that this dynamics between nation states and transnational corporations exploiting the resources, one needing the other to do that. And also, and I'll come back to that, it also illustrates this center-periphery relations very well, because the centers are generally, the Arctic is still periphery, and I come back to that. I think those could be research agendas where the Arctic is something that is worth looking at and has a larger, where one can generalize out of the Arctic to bigger global issues. I have three arguments to make my point. First, the Arctic is global. We look at the Arctic, we meet around Arctic issues, but the Arctic is inherently global. It is because of global climate change that the Arctic region becomes interesting for resources exploitation of receding ice. It is because of global pursuit of industrial development that these resources actually become interesting. We had, I think 2 years ago, we had this conference, and the then Prime Minister of Greenland, you know, argued very much for the exploitation of natural resources in Greenland. Now, how much do 57,000 people, how much oil do 57,000 people need, actually? These resources are for industrial development in the rest of the planet. Okay. Then, on the other hand, resources exploitation in the Arctic will have global consequences. It will lead to further CO2 emissions. It will lead to further global warming. And the disrupting climate in the Arctic will also affect the climate globally. So, I think the Arctic is, and that was my point before, the Arctic is a very good place where the Anthropocene is already at play and where we can observe that. My second argument, I called it the Arctic is an opportunity not to miss. The Arctic today represents, and those figures are disputed, but it represents an important portion of the available oil and especially gas, and I don't even mention minerals here because we don't yet know exactly what all the minerals are there, especially in Greenland. And so it is important for the pursuit of industrial development on this planet. The Arctic is important. I say it like that. It will offer an extension of the life of industrial civilization. The question is how much, for how long? How long do these resources, 10 years, 20 years, they give an additional lease of life of 10, 20 years to industrial civilization. But the problem is that most probably this lease on life will not be used, if you remember my arrows in the beginning, to prepare for an alternative. I call it to learn our way out of the dead end in which we are going. It will probably be used to play computer games and things like that, and probably waste it. So we will waste some time. The Arctic, as I said before, may well constitute a planetary tipping point. Okay? It will accelerate global warming, especially because of the albedo effect. We have also talked about methane, which is really a very strong greenhouse gas being released as a result of warming in the Arctic. And it will also be a significant step in global climate disruptions because of the changes in ocean currents as a result of the changes in the Arctic. We may well pass the threshold of irreversibility beyond which human habitability in many regions of this planet will not be possible anymore. Okay? So the point I want to make here is that exploiting the resources in the Arctic or not exploiting them is an important decision to be made now. And here comes my third argument, because there is no decision point in the Arctic. Nobody is going to decide. I mean, we meet around the Arctic. There is an Arctic Council, but we have also understood that probably the Arctic Council is not going to decide whether we're going to exploit the resources or not. They're doing other things. Okay. So the Arctic is periphery. Sorry to be blunt here a little bit, but the colonization of the Arctic and the gradual integration of the Arctic into global industrial civilization has a long history. And I'm just giving the most important one, starting with Christianization, scientific conquest, just to remind that the reaching of the North Pole was sort of the achievement of the conquest of the planet. Polar science, things like that, most of it from outside of the Arctic. Early economic colonization. Remember Svalbard, the coal, the Northwest Passage, the fisheries. Military colonization, Cold War not so long ago. The military bases. The political colonization, nation-state building in the Arctic, and I think that many indigenous peoples can testify to the fact of political colonization and nation-state building in the Arctic nations, and most recently Greenland as an almost nation-state is now also. So basically we have the Arctic covered, distributed among nation states, and the recent activities of the transnational corporations is just the most recent stage in this long process. It's not something fundamentally different to exploit the resources in the Arctic for non-Arctic people. Okay? And the current governance of the Arctic, or absence of governance of the Arctic, is the result of this history. Okay? It's the consequences. So basically, the future of the Arctic, the decision point I mentioned, is not decided in the Arctic. To conclude, global warming, climate disruptions are probably going to be much more severe in the Arctic than elsewhere. The Anthropocene, the era where humans are shaping the planet, has probably already started in the Arctic. Okay. Second point, a few powerful actors, and we have presented with my wife yesterday a paper on sort of analyzing the actors. I think we come to the conclusion that the future is probably, or the process is probably pushed forward by the 5 rim states plus the state-owned enterprises, energy enterprises, and a few energy transnational corporations. And this is going forward. So the only way I see to somehow constrain this process, I'm not even saying stop this process, but constrain this process, will not come from governments, but it will come from social movements. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias, for your keynote speech on why the Arctic matters for the world. And I invite you later to the podium, but first we take a presentation by Hanna Lempinen, Social Sustainability in and the Barents energyscape. Please.
Just a second, I look up my presentation from here. So, good afternoon, everybody. Like Lassi also already briefly introduced me, I'm Hanna Lempinen, but I'd like to add to the introduction that I have kind of a double affiliation, as I am PhD candidate at the University of Lapland, but I'm also based at the Arctic Center of the same university and working as a researcher there. And I was kind of prepared to have to justify my position here as a researcher focusing on energy issues, that what am I doing speaking here at a conference focusing on climate issues and socio-economic impacts of climate change in the North, but I think the speech given by Matthias just before me very well highlighted the linkages between energy production and climate change. So, even though climate change is a crucial issue, it's not the only force or only development trajectory shaping the socio-economic landscapes here in the Arctic region. As the globe is warming up, as energy consumption is growing, as new technologies are being developed, and as resources are declining at existing production sites, energy extraction activities are also moving further to the north. And these two development trajectories, climate change and energy extraction activities, are, first of all, like Matthias already touched upon, mutually reinforcing developments in a sense that as the ice retreats, the energy activities move further north, and as fossil fuels are being produced and consumed, the globe is warming up even more. Furthermore, they can be mutually reinforcing in their consequences, as the communities in the north especially are already experiencing social, cultural, environmental and economic impacts from climate change, and when you add the impacts brought on by the energy developments, they can be very dramatic and also very difficult to predict. What comes to energy-related projects here in the north, they tend to be discussed mainly in terms of their environmental impacts, economic impacts, and socio-economic impacts. But social in any way beyond employment, income, and corporate social responsibility very, very seldom becomes discussed. And this is exactly why I would like you to use the limited time that I have on my hands today to focus on this, explicitly focus on the conceptual debate on this sideline, social dimension of sustainability. Even though this is probably very familiar stuff for most of you, we're just going to have to take a few steps back and go back to the Brundtland definition of sustainable development, which kind of popularized the whole debate about sustainability. This must be familiar for the definition of sustainable development as development that fulfills the needs of today without compromising the ability of future generations to fulfill their needs in the future, is more or less the definition in a nutshell. And from this viewpoint, sustainability is seen as being comprised of three interlinked pillars: the pillars of social, economic, and environmental sustainability. And needless to say, also, the last 25 years or so have seen fierce critiques and debates about the usefulness of the concept in the first place. I've assembled here some critiques of the notion. Well, it's of course the focus on human needs is one. This idealized views about the nature of the market or the role of the market have of course also been criticized. The fact that it's more like a philosophical guideline than actually a concept which can in any way be brought to operate in any kind of context is one point, and of course the artificiality of these three pillars, and even though they're interlinked, still seeing them as separate is one point of critique. This conceptual confusion has been even furthered by this, by using the notion of sustainable development and sustainability more or less interchangeably or as the synonyms of each other. But of course sustainable development more or less implies development, which is of course, if we go that road and start defining development, that's another debate. But development doesn't kind of compromise its own basis. Sustainability more or less refers to the state of being or living, which does not undermine its own existence. And indeed, during the last 10 years, 15 years or so, there's been an emerging tendency to kind of decouple the notions of sustainable and development and start using sustainability as a prefix or a suffix linked to very many different kinds of fields ranging from fisheries to tourism to energy to climate and so on. There are divergent views on this issue. For some, it's seen as a good thing since it kind of forces to contextualize this debate into a certain topic or sector or geographical context. And there are also approaches who see it more or less as a bad thing, since and as a very clever rhetorical move which enables attaching these very positive connotations linked to the notion of sustainable development then to serve very many different kinds of political interests and goals. So if the debate over sustainable development has, or the concept of sustainable development has more or less come to the conclusion that the concept is really vague, really fuzzy and difficult to use, and it has to be kind of filled with content in each and every context. The same most definitely applies to the social dimension of sustainability. It's in academic literature, it's been described as vague, fuzzy, fluid, difficult to analyze, comprehend, define, and this vagueness of sustainability and the vagueness of social have very often led to calls for just giving up the use of the notion altogether. But there have also been, during the last 5 years or so, attempts to kind of somehow make sense and arrange this chaotic field of literature so that it could actually be turned into something useful. There have been attempts where it's been discussed how this whole debate about the social dimension has been translated into the language of politics and different political programs and targets. And here you see terms like equity, participation, awareness, cohesion, and so on. What comes to the academic debate and literature, there have been categorizations where it's been kind of the whole literature has been divided into three different kinds of approaches to social sustainability. Here, development sustainability refers to this actual very Brundtlandian discussion about fulfilling concrete needs. Bridge sustainability more or less means or sees social sustainability mainly in the context of trying to influence attitudes and change behavior so that it would promote sustainable development as a whole in general. And then the most recent strand of literature emerging has been described as maintenance sustainability, which explicitly addresses the question that what is it that we actually want to have maintained, by whom, and so on and so forth. The social sustainability has also been seen to have two kind of components or sides to it, which are not mutually exclusive. While substantive sustainability refers to the actual contribution of a project to this social or development trajectory to a certain set of social sustainability criteria. Procedural sustainability refers to the ways in which these developments that are taking place or these projects that are happening are seen and experienced and perceived and assessed by the people actually living through them and experiencing them. Even though these categorizations have very much helped to kind of make some sense out of the literature, but I still think that they kind of jump over a very self-evident question or something that would have to be addressed when we are discussing social sustainability. When they very often either leave the social in the sustainable completely undefined or just implicitly understood, or provide only very vague and general definitions. There's a common tendency when the social is actually being defined to resort to dictionary definitions, and based on these approaches the social becomes something that's an exclusively human thing, that it's limited to interactions between humans and between human institutions. But there are also alternative views to what the social actually means, what it is comprised of. And even though this is there are very divergent views within this strand of literature to what it actually is, they share the assumption that our lived and experienced social world and realities are always made up of more than just human components, that they are, first of all, more than human, and then that very often these conceptual boundaries or binaries between, for example, the human and the non-human, as well as the nature and society, and so on and so forth, are very artificial constructions. But there still is, like I mentioned, there are different views to what then we actually include to our understandings of the social. For some authors, some researchers, some discussers, elements from the nature, like the living nature, including animals, biotics in general, are seen as very important elements of our social world based on which and with which we interact. And while other views highlight, in a sense, go even further and highlight the ways that different objects and different technologies and things that are not alive or not living, and in some cases are human creations, sometimes not human creations, underline the way that how these elements are very profoundly shaping and constructing our social worlds and are important elements through which and with which we are experiencing it. So, what does all of this mean then in the context of trying to somehow trace and grasp the very elusive social dimension, like for example in my case study context of the Barents energyscape? First of all, there are no universal definitions of the social. There is no shared understanding of what the social dimension actually is. It's very dependent on the context and the situation where this question is raised. It's dependent on time, on place. Since in any situation, in the context of any case study, the mosaics of human and non-human entities, if we want to maintain this binary in the first place, they're always very different. And furthermore, it's not enough to say, it's not enough if we state that the social and its sustainability is different in different case studies or in different contexts or in different times and places. Even within the same situation, there can be very different understandings of what is being included in the, what is the social comprised of, and what it is that we want to have sustained, and what is the status of the sustainability criteria in the context of the social, in a sense, since no community, not here in the north or anywhere else, can be seen as a homogeneous entity. There are different people, different experiences, different viewpoints. There are projects which are not experienced the same way by the different members, even within the same community. So before embarking on any attempt or any journey addressing the social dimension of sustainability, I see that it would be extremely important to explicitly underline, write open, express the questions of what exactly it is that is being sustained or that we want to have sustained, at what scale, by whom and for whom, and using what institutional mechanisms. And this is more or less the thought that I would like to leave you with. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanna, for your presentation. Now I invite Matthias and Hanna, please sit there. So we have heard two very substantial, dynamic presentations, and now we have good time for several questions, comments. Where are the mics? Here. Okay. Who will start? Yes, here. Please.
Thank you. Hi, thank you both for your very interesting talks. I have cheekily two questions. One for both of you. But first of all, I wanted to ask a bit about Greenland and energy. You spoke about the contradictions there between energy being extracted and the needs of the local community. Energy is only a population of 57,000, as you say. I just wondered what your view was on the complexity between the extraction of rare earth minerals, which are used in renewable energy technology, and obviously but the inherent problems with that as a industrial extraction in a locality in Greenland. So that was one quite specific question, and then the question to you both was about this idea of social. That, as you were saying, Hanna, it's much debated what that means. Is the social a category? You know, can you do that? This is economical, this is environmental, this is social, or you know, is it possible to delimit and classify something as social or not social, which reminded me of the last part of your conclusion, that what's needed is social resistance in some way. Let me just quote you here. Only social movements can constrain the process. I thought those two things together was quite interesting. So what would be a social movement, therefore? What might that mean? Is that Bill McKibben's 350.org, or what is a social movement? That was two long questions. Apologies.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want yeah, then you can have. Okay, can you hear me now? Probably. I assume that this whole question, or the one that was addressed to me, was more or less about the social in general, and I don't see it as a category, and I would more or less say that it's a viewpoint or viewpoints to the same reality or lived and experienced reality, which can be then approached from different kinds of angles and viewpoints, and the same reality reality in a sense might look very different from different angles. And what comes to the question of social movements, there have been, in the context of, for example, of the Barents region, very local politicized movements, very grassroots level movements, for example, to object to a certain energy project taking place in the region. So, of course, it's an issue of scale, whether we're talking about the local movements or do we want to talk about like the more global social resistance and so on and so forth. But at least the local is there and it's happening. But of course, we cannot talk about the Barents region nor the Arctic as one in any way unified whole. There are very big differences between countries, for example, even what comes to the possibilities for this kind of movements to emerge in the first place.
Thank you for a very good question. Let me start with Greenland. I think the first point you make, we have to distinguish. I get your point about rare earth being exploited for renewable energies. Okay, no, I think it's a fair point. And you know, if you go with the graph I showed before, I think we should use the remaining energy we have for that kind of purposes instead of wasting it. So, yes, you can say stop it and things like that, but we should use what the remaining energy for adapting or for preparing, okay? So that would speak for that kind of exploitation. The problem in Greenland, I see, is that the exploitation of the natural resources is a means towards national independence. It's a way of buying off. Greenland is about financed 50% by the Danish government. So once you can finance yourself, you probably get closer to your own nation. And that brings me to the second point. I'm not sure that's particularly desirable for a political scientist, yes, but I think what we see in the Arctic and elsewhere is that the nation state is not that fantastic an instrument to deal with the global crisis. Okay? Actually, I see the opposite. I see the nation state as a tool to promote development hand in hand with big corporations and not stemming that process. That's what leads me to thinking about what is the alternative. Where is the alternative? And I mean, that really offends, I think, political scientists. I'm myself a political scientist, and lawyers. I'm not sure whether the nation state is a good tool to stop that process or to stem that process. And that leaves us with peoples. But peoples need to be organized in order to do something. And that raises, I think, an interesting question for the Arctic. The Arctic is not not very densely populated. So you get social movements in India. If people are really fed up in Brazil, they go to the street. If people are really fed up in India, they go to the streets. And But in the Arctic, with such sparsity, it's difficult to imagine. So we have the indigenous peoples who are organized, who are, maybe they can make a difference, but they're also colonized by their own nation states. And so I think we have to think about social movements globally as well. It will not just be local movements, it will also be global movements.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Back there. Please.
With regard to your comments about Greenland, that's very interesting because Greenland becoming its own nation state would be the first, well, not the first, but the first Arctic country that has been colonized and yet has taken the reins to become their own nation state. And so I think that is very interesting, and I think it's important for Greenland. That being said, their means to get there is the sale of oil and gas leases in their waters, and so that is of concern, of global concern. With respect to your comment about India and Brazil and being able to go to the streets, with respect, I think in the Arctic culture milieu, the people of the Arctic can also go to the streets versus via the internet. So they do have a voice to express their concerns. Those are my comments.
Okay,
but I loved your presentations.
Thank you. There was no question, so both speakers have 1 minute in the end of the discussion. Okay, are there questions, comments? Are there? Yes, there. Please.
Hi, I have a question to Matthias. I would like your approach, and Arctic is a global issue, but at the same time I still remember that 70, maybe 80% of the resources are in the borders of Russia.
Absolutely.
And from this perspective, it makes it more complicated, because approach Russia to climate change and the way you use resources is not shared, or it's not the same like in other countries of the region. Could you comment about this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Matthias?
Very difficult. I mean, you're totally right that Russia has a disproportionate part of the Arctic resources, especially oil and gas, and Russia is particularly dependent on these resources. It's not, an add-on to I don't know what the exact number is, but I mean, what I recently heard was about 50% of the GDP of Russia comes not only from oil and gas, but from oil and gas out of the Arctic region. So that puts Russia in a particular situation where it is maybe like Greenland, dependent as a survival of the state on the Arctic, and will be very reluctant to. On the other hand, as far as I know, there are some issues in developing the resources in the Arctic for Russia because of lack of technology and sometimes lack of finance. So they need to team up with Western companies in order to do that. And maybe there is some sort of leverage. If I may, I can just answer on Greenland.
Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to make one point. I think there is one element that is also it's a nation. It's a new nation. One of the recent. It's a process of decolonization, very simply. But it's indigenous peoples. The majority of the inhabitants of Greenland are indigenous peoples, and I don't know very many nations in the world that are actually composed majoritarily of indigenous peoples. And so it's a little bit, how shall I say, dramatic or paradoxical that it is indigenous peoples that are actually promoting, Greenland is a big chunk, promoting the development in the Arctic.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Can I just quickly...
There.
Hanna,
Okay, please.
Yes, just very briefly on the social sustainability. Very interesting in the academic analysis. It just strikes me that I find some kind of difference between the very practical, maybe a bit naive views of social sustainability, which I found very applicable to the Arctic sphere. Let me explain. Just the fact that in the Arctic, what I observe in many of this experience is mainly from northern Sweden, Finland, and Norway, seeing that many communities are not limited by economic opportunities, but by the lack of the capacity of the local communities to reproduce themselves. For example, of functioning socially, and that is what is limiting development, if you like. And in that respect, social sustainability, used in a very naive way, becomes a practical notion that is very useful to position these obstacles as very different from many other places, which make, as a practical implication, I see in northern Sweden, seeing that youth activity, youth initiatives become the key to development, working on teenagers, making sure teenagers have a very good experience from their home environment is the key, because that makes them come back. And that's the key to the development of that community. And that's something very different from most other small villages around in other parts of Europe or the world. So no, just I think I see a difference between this academic analysis of social sustainability, where I see your problems with the notion, and the very concrete talking to politicians, where I feel I get a message through using that notion. But it's maybe very different levels of using the notion.
Okay.
It is very different, and I'm not probably, well, I'm just going to pick up on your comment and continue from there, that in terms of oil and gas projects taking place in the region, like in the Barents region, for example, if they're, in a way, they're discussed as, or viewed as an instrument on the path towards social sustainability, which is linked to some of these things that you just said, that how to make these regions attractive and how to make the communities attractive and how to keep the North inhabited in the first place, how to kind of maintain the social structure in the North. And yeah, I see this as it's instead of being in any way a threat or a challenge from the social sustainability viewpoint, they're posed as an instrument for achieving social sustainability.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one or two more, if there are. Please. We are here for the talk. No? Okay. As I promised, you will have 1 minute in the end, and you can comment some questions or comments from the audience. But I would also I would like to ask one question from you. If thing is like Matthias, you said, there is no decision point in the Arctic. So where is the point? Where are the decisions made dealing with the Arctic in the let's say in the near future, when it comes to these real issues like energy exploitation of natural resources? Please.
Okay, thanks. Maybe I can start. The decisions are made in Moscow. Maybe the most important, to pick on your point, they are made at Gazprom, maybe together with some Western companies. They are made at Statoil in Norway. They will be made maybe in some other capitals, in Washington or in Ottawa, but I don't think they are made in the Arctic.
I would like to, I don't know, maybe offer a bit more positive viewpoint to this. Of course, I share the same understanding as well, but on the other hand, can we talk about the Arctic? It's a huge area. It's a very internally diverse area. Can we talk about can we say that there are decisions being made about the Arctic as a whole in one place or in many places? I mean, decisions that concern the Arctic are made in all of these places that he mentioned. But on the other hand, the Arctic region, it's also not only about oil and gas developments. There are a lot of regional renewable energy projects. unfolding around the Arctic. And I would say that even though many important decisions are made in these locations listed just now, but there is also a possibility to make other kind of decisions in other local and regional contexts.
Thank you so much.
So what was to kind of end with this idealistic.
Okay, I'm sorry about this very intensive program, but let's have a 5 minutes break, so the parallel sessions will start 10 minutes past 2. Thank you.
It's always good.
Was good. The conclusion is very good.